and welcome to the Culture Ward, where we dissect and dismember pop culture in all its forms. My name is Jess, and today we're talking about The Last of Us, the iconic video game series turned hit TV show starring Pedro Pascal. Season 2 of that show drops this week on Max, and in advance I thought we would examine the history of the franchise and maybe talk about what to expect in Season 2. I actually bought this game back in 2013 when it first came out on the PlayStation 3. I vaguely recall doing a playthrough. It's a great game, no doubt, but there were elements of the gameplay that I didn't really like at first. And it's weird because it's by the same developers and really similar in style and gameplay to the Uncharted series, which I always loved. Anyway, it's been so long since I played the game, I actually decided to replay it recently to refamiliarize myself. I've recorded what I think is the whole thing, and I will post the entire playthrough in the coming days or weeks. Not that anyone asked, but just in case there's anyone who hasn't played through and wants to know the whole story, I'll have it up in multiple parts soon. Anyway, let's talk about The Last of Us. An action-adventure game by developer Naughty Dog, originally released in 2013 for the PlayStation 3. The following year, it was remastered for PlayStation 4, and this is actually the version that I play in my walkthrough. The game is heavily narrative-focused, following our main protagonist Joel as he shepherds a 14-year-old girl, Ellie, across a post-apocalyptic landscape to meet up with another group of survivors. Warning, there will be spoilers in this video, both for the game and Season 1 of the TV show, so leave now if you don't want to know what happens. The underlying premise of the narrative, which provides the setting for the game, is the collapse of civilization after a fungal infection spreads around the world, which turns infected people into cannibalistic creatures. Basically zombies, but not quite. Like any zombie apocalypse survival horror scenario, you split your time fighting zombies, they refer to them in the game as infected, as well as rival human survivors. There are several different types or classes of zombies, including runners. These are the people in the first stages of infection, usually very early. They are the most zombie-like, I guess, in that they still look human. They just have blood coming from their mouth, nose, and eyes, and they have all their senses intact, which means they can see you and hear you, and they will run after you. Stalker is the second stage of infected. These people look less human, with cordyceps fungus sprouting out of their bodies and faces, looking like barnacles. Stalkers usually stand still and don't run toward people. They wait for people to wander by, and then they spring into action. Clickers are the third stage of infected. These people have been infected for a substantial period of time and have barnacles growing all over, mostly taking over their faces, making them blind. However, they can still hear you. In a lot of ways, they are the scariest of the monsters, and you have to sneak around them throughout the game. And they make this clicking noise that's really unnerving. I guess it's like an echolocation type thing. Bloaters are the fourth stage. They've been infected for years and have grown in size and are more cordyceps than human. Big, fast, strong, and durable, they throw pieces of fungus at the player, and they're basically mini-bosses. It takes a lot of shots to take them down. The primary plot of the game is quite simple. Joel has to deliver Ellie to a group of survivors who are working on a cure to the disease, because Ellie has an extremely rare immunity to it. This plot takes us from one location to the next, beginning inside Boston, to a small town outside Boston, to Wyoming, to a university in Colorado, and finally to a hospital in Salt Lake City. Of course, the journey is always complicated by blocked paths, ambushes from unfriendly human antagonists, and frequent run-ins with pockets of the infected. However, while this plot guides the gameplay, there's much combat stealth, strategy, and puzzle solving to get around the various obstacles. It's not really the focus of the game's narrative. The narrative focuses on the developing relationship between Joel and Ellie. In the very beginning of the game, as well as the show, which we will briefly discuss shortly, Joel's 14-year-old daughter Sarah is killed during the initial outbreak and panic. When we connect with Joel 20 years later, he has become a morally ambiguous, emotionally bankrupt survivor. Joel is well known to be dangerous and runs a secret illegal smuggling operation in the quarantine zone near Boston with his equally pragmatic partner Tess. It is because of their reputation as dangerous and capable smugglers that Joel and Tess are recruited to deliver Ellie to a group of dissidents, often referred to as terrorists, known as the Fireflies. Ellie had been bitten by an infected 3 weeks previously and hadn't turned into a zombie, so it is determined that she has a rare immunity. Her mother was also a member of the Fireflies but was killed years before, making Ellie an orphan. The current leader of the Fireflies, Marlene, has been Ellie's caretaker since her mother died, and it is she that hires Joel and Tess to move Ellie out of the quarantine zone. At first, Ellie is reluctant, and she is very much a rebellious teenager, and Joel is gruff and emotionally cut off, viewing Ellie as nothing more than cargo. He treats her in an abrupt and businesslike manner, demanding her obedience and frequently offering her almost cruel indifference. Ellie is feisty and rebellious, but also has a lighthearted sense of humor and wonder, despite her difficult life and circumstances. She begins trying to ingratiate herself to Joel early on, despite his resistance. Over the course of the next 15 or so in-game hours, they face numerous challenges together, and gradually we begin to see mutual bonds forming. Joel is slow to acknowledge his growing emotional and paternal attachment to Ellie, as we see when he tries to convince his brother in Wyoming to take Ellie to the Fireflies, because he is still haunted by the death of his daughter 20 plus years earlier. However, there was a turning point near this time when Ellie has to save Joel's life, and during his convalescence she is captured by a group of cannibals. And Joel, still seriously injured, risks everything to rescue her. By the time they reach the end, the hospital in Utah where the Fireflies are trying to find a cure, their relationship has evolved into a father-daughter relationship. When he finds out that Ellie's rare condition can be used to synthesize a cure and possibly save humanity, but only at the expense of Ellie's life, Joel refuses to allow it. He chooses Ellie's life over the potential well-being of all humanity. And this is supposed to be a morally ambiguous ending, the choice of saving one life at the expense of many others. I didn't think it was that ambiguous, but that's because I have a daughter, and I would have done the same thing without even hesitating. The Last of Us is a familiar story, meticulously crafted and made new in an unfamiliar setting. We get to witness two people, both initially coping with their own loss and the moral complexities of a harsh reality, gradually come to care for each other and find meaning in a world they had lost hope in. The narrative juggles the concepts of trust and betrayal and the impact of loss and fear of attachment in two complex and compelling characters. The main characters are able to find love and hope and meaning in a world that seemed to have lost the capacity for such notions. In short, it is a beautiful story set in a well-crafted setting and overarching narrative. The gameplay is intense at times and does a good job using resource scarcity to always add a touch of anxiety to every encounter. You never seem to have enough ammo or health or crafting supplies. There are times when the action is dialed back and you have to solve environmental puzzles, such as figuring out how to get across a gap, without feeling contrived. And even in the slower moments of the game, when Joel and Ellie are just making their way across the landscape, the interstitial dialogue and random encounters never seem dull. The Last of Us, in other words, is a terrific video game, from its well-crafted narrative to the impressive graphics to its focused but open-ended gameplay. The voice acting is also some of the best I have heard in a video game, and the depth and sincerity of the motion capture cutscenes adds layers of complexity to the characters. The depth of Joel and Ellie's evolving relationship was groundbreaking. This game made it clear that character development in a video game could be just as compelling as in other media, and it has since inspired other video game developers to write more complex characters. The Last of Us has received universal acclaim from gamers and critics alike. It has been described as the most riveting, emotionally resonant, story-driven epic of the console generation. It won multiple awards, including an Annie Award, British Academy Video Gaming Award, an award from the Game Developers' Choice Awards, and has since become one of the best-selling games, having sold more than 20 million copies between its initial release, its 2014 remaster, and the newest remaster for the PS5. While I was initially reluctant to play this game through, the story alone kept me engaged. Before too long, I was appreciating the gameplay. It was different from other games, and I learned to accept that that was a good thing. And I can honestly say that The Last of Us is one of the greatest video games of all time. Not long after the release of the video game, a live-action movie adaptation entered development. But by 2016 it had stalled, and by 2019 the film rights had relinquished. However, in 2020, it was decided that a television show would be a better fit, and it was picked up by HBO. Released in 2023, the series was created and written by showrunners Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, who was also one of the writers of the video game. It stars Pedro Pascal as Joel and Bella Ramsey as Ellie. Not a big fan of the casting. Pedro is a good actor, but at least visually, he didn't seem to fit the character of Joel. I mean, why is this guy cast and everything? I mean, he's a decent actor, but there are other actors out there, right? I think Hugh Jackman would have looked more the part, but anyway, because he is a decent actor, He actually does a fine job in the show, at least with the script that he's given. As for Bella Ramsey, I don't know anything about this actress, but I do know that she doesn't really look like Ellie from the video game. It's not like they had to cast somebody identical to the character in the game, so that part doesn't really bother me. If Bella Ramsey was the best actress for the job, then she should have gotten it. That being said, I'm having a hard time believing that there weren't other actresses that were as good or better than Bella Ramsey that looked more the part. So I'm guessing they picked her for some other reason other than talent or appearance. Anyway, I guess she's fine with the script. Whatever. What I can say about the show is it's basically the same story. Joel has to get Ellie to the Fireflies, but there are a lot of differences in the details. The way the fungus grows all over and touching part of the fungus alerts the infected from far away. The way Tess dies, the little things along the way. The whole Henry and Sam story arc that's completely different from the game. But it's ultimately the same story. And it's not bad, but there are some things that I don't like. First and foremost, Ellie. And this is not an attack on Bella Ramsey, this is on the writing of Ellie for the show. At least in the early season, she's just way more bitchy and standoffish than in the game. She was always a feisty character at times, but she was sweet, funny, and most importantly, she was vulnerable. She had this kind of fake bravado that she would put on, but ultimately she was scared and she looked to Joel for guidance. The show, again, at least early on, doesn't allow her to be vulnerable. She seems to lead Joel around, bossing him around, not listening to him, always dictating when they can move on. I think they tried to speed run her character development, where in the game she grew into the part of being a competent survivalist alongside Joel. But in the game, they start her out basically at the same level as this hardened, consummate survivor Joel. It does get better. They do show some vulnerability later, and overall, her character isn't all bad. The same for Joel. At first, he seems much less sure of himself. He's almost whiny at times. He's very brooding and vulnerable and touchy, lacking much of the stoicism that marked his character in the game. But again, played well enough by Pedro Pascal, he ends up being a decent character in the show. And I don't want this to be an issue, but this season is 9 episodes long. They used 2 entire episodes as unneeded flashbacks showcasing 2 separate gay relationships. So first you had Frank and Bill in episode 3, and then Ellie and Riley in episode 7. Now, the Riley thing was actually adapted from a DLC from the game called Left Behind, but it adds nothing of value to the story, other than to make sure we all know that Ellie is gay. The Bill and Frank episode is more frustrating, even though it was a decent episode of television. The acting was good, the characters are good, the story itself wasn't bad, but first of all, it doesn't add anything to the show, and second of all, it was completely different than their characters in the game. It was just a drastic change to the story of Bill and Frank. Alright, all that being said, by the time the last episode was finished, it was clear that the show was pretty well done, especially the last episode. It stayed true to the source material as best as I could expect. Most of the main story beats were replicated faithfully in the show, and the story beneath was mostly faithful as well. So, just like in the game, Season 1 of the show follows Joel and Ellie as they travel across the country looking for the Fireflies. It ends when they find them in Salt Lake City and, just as in the game, the Fireflies are attempting to find a vaccine for the infection, and they intend to use Ellie's immunity as a basis for that vaccine. In order to do that, they have to remove a growth from Ellie's brain which will kill her. Joel refuses to allow that, choosing instead to save Ellie. In the process of saving Ellie, Joel has to kill pretty much all the Fireflies. That's setting up this stupid revenge narrative for the second season, I guess. final episode was really well done in that it was faithful to the source material and Joel finally acts like Joel. One thing I will give this show top marks for is the visuals. From the crumbling and overgrown cityscapes to the terrifyingly realistic clickers, the special effects and cinematography are first rate. Likewise, the sound design, score, and soundtrack are all outstanding as well, delivering a tone and experience similar to that of the game. In short, Season 1 was fine, a solid 6 out of 10. The video game sequel, The Last of Us Part 2, was released in 2020, and it too received almost universal critical acclaim. However, the gaming community wasn't so universal in its praise. Probably one of the most divisive games in history, The Last of Us 2 picks up roughly 5 years after the first one with a grown-ish Ellie and an aging Joel, but it introduces a new character, Abby, early in the game when she does something, well, terrible, irredeemable, and that totally ruins the game for a lot of fans. I won't spoil it here, although I imagine it is one of the worst kept secrets on the internet, but what they did to Joel, both physically and the way they handled his character, are a deal breaker for me and millions of others. They retconned his story from the first installment and ruined him in the second. Abby, the new character, and Ellie are the two controllable characters in the game, and you spend roughly 50% of your time with each character. The problem? Well, first, Abby is just the absolute worst. The dual female protagonists are just poorly written and unlikable in almost every way. In short, without any spoilers, the story for the second installment was just unsatisfying and completely at odds with the story and messaging from the first game. It was dark, nihilistic, and devoid of any emotional payoff or catharsis for any of the characters. And perhaps worst of all, it seemed to undo those elements from the first game. That's why it was so divisive. Well, that and the unnecessary and gratuitous sexual, LGBT, and feminist messaging spread throughout. Identity politics is used as a crutch for bad storytelling and a shield against criticism. Now, there are good parts to the game. It is, after all, a beautiful and stunning visual experience. The attention to detail is staggering. The gameplay is extremely familiar, to the point of being almost indistinguishable from the first game, but with some added options, such as in the final encounter when the game gives the player several different ways to complete the mission. And it had a few flashbacks that are poignant and moving and feel like the original game. And that's really when this game shines the brightest, or at all, when it feels like the original game. Unfortunately, that didn't happen nearly enough. The Last of Us was renewed for a second season almost as soon as Season 1 dropped. People like the show, so why wouldn't they do a Season 2? But what would happen in it? Would they ignore The Last of Us Part 2 and tell a new story set in the time period between the two video games? That might be really good, as the flashbacks from The Last of Us 2 were actually pretty interesting. Nope, they will be adapting The Last of Us Part 2, although it is said to be structured and paced slightly differently. It is essentially the same story, apparently. I'm sure Pedro Pascal will do a fine job as Joel, for a little while, but Bella Ramsey just doesn't seem to capture the spirit, charisma, and at least in the second installment, the physicality of Ellie. I have no idea how the new characters are going to be. I guess the good news is that they can't really be any less likable than they were in the game. Maybe the show will change my mind about the source material. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I'm sure the Access media will still drool all over it and praise the writers and actors regardless of how awful it is, because once again, I am nearly certain the identity politics will be heaped and layered and shoved down our throats throughout this entire thing. It's all about representation, right? And it should go without saying, although it never does, you can have all the representation that you want, as long as you tell a good story. And no one, with rare exceptions, is going to complain. Anyway, what do you think? What did you think of the first season of The Last of Us? Are you looking forward to Season 2? Or are you sitting this one out? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Bye for now, and I hope to see you next time in the Culture War.